Go ahead and open in a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you again. We can take a look at your word. And Lord, it is truly like a mine, Lord, that we dig in, that we find valuable things as we're sifting, as we're digging, as we're holding up to the light and looking. And Lord, we just thank you for the valuable things that we have in your word. I pray that as we look at it, again, that your Holy Spirit would open our eyes, help us to understand things that perhaps we haven't understood before, or maybe it's just been a while, and help us to find application that, again, we might walk in a more worthy manner before you in our daily living. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I don't see Bill at the moment, but I really appreciate Bill teaching for me a couple of weeks ago. He taught chapter 3. Is he working today? It's too bad. He has to work every so often on Sundays. All right, so before we kind of get into things, I just kind of wanted to have a quick discussion about reactions, and in particular reactions to God's call. We're seeing Moses reacting to God's call. It's very clear, very obvious that God is calling him to do something. There can be no question, there can be no doubt that that's exactly what's going on, okay? However, there's other people who've also differently. Think about Abram. How did Abram respond when God called him? What did he do? Yes? Right. He didn't, as far as we can tell, it's not recorded, he had a discussion, a debate. It says that he went. Now we know on the way, there were a couple of hiccups on the way. He wasn't supposed to take any relatives, and he did. And he spent some time in Haran. He wasn't really supposed to, but he did. But he went. He got up and he went. How about Jonah? How did Jonah react to the call? He broke out his swim trunks and shark repellent, Dan. Yeah, he not only said no, he said, no, I'll go the other direction. So he took off and went the opposite direction with some less than pleasing results, right? How about Jeremiah? I know perhaps you haven't looked at Jeremiah for a while, but in Jeremiah chapter 1, he was called, and do you remember how Jeremiah responded to the call? In Jeremiah 1, he said, I'm a youth. I don't know how to speak. Your mouth, I'll speak for you. And as far as we can tell, Jeremiah ended the discussion and said, okay, so he went. How about the apostles, the disciples? When they were called, do you remember how they reacted? Yeah, right, Tony. I mean, as far as we know, all the disciples, when he was called, they dropped their nets or whatever they were doing, and they followed him for 3 years, you know. So it was a big thing for them to do that. As far as we know, none of the disciples, refused or were hesitant to go with Jesus. So here we're going back now to Moses, and we see that Moses does what? He argues. He debates. He negotiates. He tries to negotiate. So remember now, we have the burning bush. We have this bush in front of Moses that's in flame. It's not being consumed, but it's in flame. God's talked to him. He told him to take off his sandals, which he did. He says to Moses, I have seen, I have heard, I am aware of the sufferings of Israel, and I'm going to deliver them. To which Moses said, woo-hoo, you go, God. Yes, go, go, go. Anyway, I got stuff to do. I got these sheep over here, but thanks for letting me know. Thank you. And you go get them, right? Okay, so it's not exactly like that. But Moses, he tells Moses, oh, okay. And then God says, oh, by the way, I'm sending you. You're going to go. And you're going to be the one that's going to deliver the Israelites out of Egypt. And Moses' response, did I mention I got stuff to do? I love the smell of sheep in the desert, and, I can't see, I know, I'm making all that stuff up. But it's not too far from it. Moses was not a fan. He probably liked the idea that God's going to deliver Israel because they're his people. Great. But for himself to be involved, that's not exactly what Moses is banking on. So he asked 5 questions, and actually you could say he made 5 objections to why he wasn't the man that God should send. So now how is this different from the earlier Moses? The Moses 40 years earlier. How is this a different Moses? Yes? Yeah, he's older and wiser. Certainly that's true. Aaron? Yes. You look at Moses 40 years earlier, and you see some impetuousness, right? You see him kind of taking things on his own. Now, maybe he was convinced he was the man. And as it turns out, well, he's right. But his timing was a bit off. And also his motivation was a bit off. His motivation was he's going to deliver the people by himself. But God says, no, it's going to be a team effort, and I'm a part of the team. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen mentions that Moses thought that the people of Israel were going to recognize him as the deliverer. Did they in the beginning? No, they didn't recognize him as that at all. In fact, they talked him down. They kind of made fun of him a little bit. He was rejected by the Israelites, and he was rejected by Pharaoh, who tried to kill him. And that kind of left a mark. Now, for the past 40 years, Moses has been in a desert area, semi-arid desert, leading sheep, finding grass, finding water for the sheep. That's what he's been doing for the past 40 years. Undoubtedly, he thought he's done. Okay? Deliver Israel. I bet that didn't even hardly cross his mind anymore. I'm a shepherd. This is what I'm going to do till I die. And it's a good living. Right, Al? You know, it's good. Mostly. No. 40 years. He's 80, and who knows how much longer he's going to live. So I think he went ahead, he bought into it, this is what I'm doing. So a large part of what happened to Moses during that 40 years was to humble him, to get his eyes off himself, and now to turn them on somebody else. Now, so successful has this humbling process been that Moses can't even conceive that he would be the one to go to talk to Pharaoh. It doesn't even enter his mind, which in a sense actually shows he is ready. Why would that be? Why would it be that he's ready now versus not ready earlier? Say it again? Yeah, he's not 40 years old anymore. You know, Melody. In our weakness, God is strong. Right. He's 80. It turns out that he was a pretty, a pretty healthy person, very strong. But he was 80, and he's not going to rely on Moses anymore. He's going to have to rely upon the Lord. So we have our first two arguments in chapter 3. So looking at chapter 3, so there again, now remember the situation. He's there in front of this burning bush. Don't forget the context. The burning bush is the Lord who's talking to him. So this is the conversation that's going on. So we see in the affliction and verse 11 of chapter 3. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?" Who am I? Well, who was Moses? Who is Moses at that time? He's a shepherd. Where is he living? He's living in Midian. He's living in a foreign country. He was raised as an Egyptian with all the perks of being a part of Pharaoh's household. Now he's in Midian in desert. That's what he is. Who is he? He's a nobody. And that's right. He is a nobody by himself. But God gives the definitive answer in verse 12. "Certainly I will be with you." So the answer to Moses' question is, who am I? God says, I will be with you. It doesn't matter who you are, Moses. It matters who I am. And I will be with you. God responds to him. Argument number 2. So Moses says, oh, okay, that didn't work. So he says in verse 13, they're going to ask me who you are, and can you tell me what your name is? Like that's going to stump God or something. What if I'm asked your name, and his name is what? In English, it's I am. In Hebrew, we know it's Yahweh, but it means I am, or I exist. So you ask somebody their name, they say, I exist. Wow, that's kind of definitive. He says he's the self-existent one. And then he gives further information of how Moses is going to speak to his people, to Pharaoh, and how he's going to plunder the Egyptians. Which brings us now to chapter 4. So we're going to read verses 1 to 17. We're going to start with Sarah over here with verse 1. All right, thank you, everybody. So, objection number 3. The first two didn't work. The first one was, who am I? The second one was, what is your name? Okay, here's this one. In verse 1, I may not be believed. If you're taking the notes, I may not be believed, which is true. He may not be believed. So that could be a valid objection, I guess. But God's already told him he will be successful. God said, I'll be with you. And that should be all that it needs for him, but it wasn't really. But yet God shows great patience with Moses. He doesn't, at this point, give him a kick or a nudge or whatever. He's actually very patient with Moses, even with these doubting questions. And God's answer to him are 3 miraculous signs in verses 3 until, I believe, 13 or so. So God says, what's that in your hand? It's a stick, or it's a staff, a walking stick, which he had. He told him to throw it on the ground, and when he threw it on the ground, it became a snake or a serpent. Now, we don't know what kind of a serpent, but we can expect it was a venomous serpent because Moses ran from it. It wasn't a garter snake. It probably was a cobra, but we don't know for sure. But something that certainly scared Moses. It would have been probably about 6 feet long at least, and snakes, when they get that tall, they're pretty intimidating. So Moses ran from it. God then tells him to grab the snake. How? Oh, think about that for just a second. Okay? Now, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Iowa, in southern Iowa, and when I was growing up, the city hall would pay you $1 for every rattle from a rattlesnake that you brought in. This is in the 60s. It's $1. That's big money when you're 8 or 9 years old in the 60s. So they would go out, my friends would, they had air rifles or they had archery, and they would come back, they'd show me 2 or 3 rattles they're taking to City Hall and getting their money, and I get $0.25 a week for allowance if it goes well. So naturally, I wanted to go hunt rattlesnakes. Made perfect sense to me. My parents, can you believe this, how short-sighted they were? They said no. No, you can't hunt rattlesnakes. But there's big money in rattlesnakes. How short-sighted were my parents, right? What I don't understand is the parents of the other kids. I think they probably didn't let them know. Maybe they didn't tell them, but I did. And anyway, I can guarantee you that when they killed a rattlesnake, you don't grab it by the tail, even if you think it's dead, in case it's not, because as Lynn motioned, you grab the back end, the front end's still free, and the front end's the problem. That's got the fangs in it, right? So for God to tell Moses, I want you to grab that thing by the tail, is a little bit of faith, because you don't want to grab that thing, especially if it's a cobra, by the tail. But this time Moses listens, and when he does, it becomes a staff or a stick again. Exactly right. God gives him another sign. He says, put your hand inside of your cloak, which he does, and pull it out. And when he pulls it out, it says his hand was completely leprous. Now, in Hebrew, it means that it was flaky white with leprosy. So you'd look at his hand, it would look all flaky and white. And now leprosy was viewed in the Old Testament as what? Say it again? A curse. It was called the living death. If you have leprosy, you have living death. You can't live in the camp anymore or in the city. You have to isolate yourself. And there's 2 reasons for that. The first reason is because God said it. The second unspoken reason is in case it's contagious, you won't pass it around. Okay? So Moses did this, and I can only imagine the fear that struck Moses' heart when he looked at his hand. Oh my, it's leprous. Now, that's a sign, but it's also a sign to Moses. Why is it a sign to Moses? Who has your life in his hand, Moses? Go ahead, Lem. Yeah. In other words, kind of like, when your dad tells you something. Anyway, I won't go there because you're nice enough to come to our class, right? It's like, by the way, Moses, remember that hand thing? Yeah, it's me. You really should do what I say. So anyway, he puts it back in his cloak, and we see the hand becomes completely restored again. And then the last thing he says in verse 9 is, if this doesn't work, go ahead and pour some water from the Nile River onto the ground, and when you do, the water will change into blood, which is also a harbinger of what's to come later during one of the plagues, when the whole river will be changed into blood for a period of time. So, and then also he promises that they will believe. So he says, they will believe you. But then Moses has another objection in verse 10. Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither recently nor in time past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Now, in the Hebrew language, it means literally, I have a heavy tongue. Although one of the commentators said, well, he's using it pretty well here, isn't he? Against the Lord. But anyway, I have a heavy tongue. I have poor speaking skills. Now, some commentators are of the opinion that Moses had a speech impediment, which is possible. I mean, maybe he stammered a bit or something. We don't know, but whether he did or not, he was self-conscious about his speech and didn't think he was a very good speaker. So he throws that out there for the Lord. Now, was Moses an ineffective speaker? What would you folks say as a jury? Was he an ineffective speaker? If you look in the future here, most of us have read, no, he's not really an ineffective speaker at all. He's a great speaker. In fact, in Acts chapter 7 again, it says that he was a man rich in works and words. That's what Stephen was saying when he was given his defense before the Sanhedrin. Moses was a great man in works and words. So if Moses did have a speech issue, it didn't slow him down. He was still effective in what he did. Now, another idea is maybe Moses had this speech problem because he's self-conscious. Maybe he's his own worst critic. Most of us as guys, we sometimes have a difficult time with our self-image. We tend to think of ourselves in a negative light a lot. I'm reading a book right now which talks about that specifically, that we have a tendency to dismiss ourselves or to marginalize ourselves with our skills, abilities, etc. So far, it's a pretty good book. Maybe Moses was doing that. In Moses' mind, he's a loser. You know, Lord, I tried that. It didn't work. You know, that ship has sailed. I've already tried that. And last time I spoke to the Jews, I had got run out of Egypt. So I'm terrible at that. So the Lord goes ahead and gives him another reminder in verse 11. Well, who made your mouth? Who makes somebody mute, blind? Who is responsible for the senses? And God says himself. Now, the word reminder, I often quote my daughter Angela, my oldest daughter. She has a code word, which I've mentioned before, for her kids when they're in the store and they're not behaving. She says, would you like a reminder? Smiley face. Oh, no, Mom, I don't want a reminder. Because a reminder when they get home is, well, a reminder. You know? And fill in the blanks. Maybe God's kind of giving Moses a reminder here. Listen, I made you. I made your mouth. Remember the leprosy a second ago? I could take it all away in a split second. He's not saying that, but there's kind of an implication there. He's reminding Moses who was in charge. However, it doesn't take. So verse 13 says this, please, Lord, now send the message by whomever you will. Now, that almost sounds, I don't know, how could I say it, like a plea or something? It's not. Oh, I want to step out. I missed something there. He says, verse 12, sorry, now then go, and I. Now, those words, now then go, it's called a Hebraism for get moving. Here's an example, an Americanism. Move it! Okay? Now, if you are from another language and you translate the words move it, you'll think, well, what are they going to move? Right? Are they going to move? But for you and I, it's an Americanism. It means get off our posterior and get moving. This is what God just said to Moses. Move it. Get going. Okay? And then Moses' response in verse 13 literally says this, choose anybody else but me. Please, Lord, choose anybody else but me. Now remember, there's the burning bush. You're talking to God in the desert. And you just told God, after he's been so nice to you, anybody else but me. Anybody. A donkey, but not me. What seems to be the bottom line for Moses? What's his bottom line? He definitely doesn't want to go. But listen, God comes to you and he says, Greg, I have this thing that's going to honor you. People are going to remember you forever and ever and ever, I mean, that's quite an offer to come from God speaking to you. I mean, a lot of people would say, yes, but Moses doesn't. Why? What is Moses' problem, ultimately? What's that? It is fear, definitely fear. What's he lacking? What's that? Confidence? Faith. Wrap it all together. He is afraid, he lacks confidence, but he lacks faith. In the burning bush, the God who's talking to him, who has just done this miraculous stuff with you, who has said, I will be with you, you will be successful. No, send anybody else but me. Now, those of us that are parents who have negotiated with kids in the past, No offense, Lem. You know, and the kid has disagreed 3 or 4 times with what you're telling them to do. What is sometimes our response as parents? Oh, that's okay. Yeah, you can have your treat tonight and everything just like normal, right? Maybe not. Maybe a reminder. Do we need to give you a reminder? No, Mama, not a reminder. You know, we get angry because our children are being what? Disobedient, stubborn, all of the above. They're stomping their foot and they're saying, no, I won't do that. Well, God is not much different. Verse 14, then the anger of the Lord burned against Moses. Now, here's a question for you. How did Moses know that? How did he know that? I know this is a ridiculous question. It doesn't have anything to do with it, but it's my curiosity piques. Aaron, go ahead. Just like Mom's face gets red, the bush gets redder. Maybe the flame gets higher. No, maybe. I mean, the voice inflection changes a little bit. Kind of like a mom or a dad, right? But whatever it was, Moses had no question. Apparently, he's less than happy with me. You know, so he knows this. God's speaking to him. Now Moses seems to understand that this is an offer he can't refuse, right? It's an offer. You can't turn down Moses, okay? He's Italian, so anyway. Yeah, so nevertheless, but even so, God still graciously removes the last obstacle that Moses threw out there in verse 14. The obstacle was, I can't speak very well. And instead of God saying, yes, you can. I've been watching you your whole life. You can speak great. Okay, fine. I will send your brother Aaron, because we both know he's a good speaker. And so it looks like Aaron has decided, quote unquote, to go visit Moses in Midian. So Aaron is going to speak for Moses. In this way, Moses has no longer valid objections. God has removed every one of them. And in one respect, too, God has diminished Moses' glory just a little bit, because now he's going to share the limelight with Aaron. I don't think that was his concern. You know, I don't think he would care. But what would have been all of Moses' glory, as it were, he's now going to share with Aaron because of some stubbornness that he is showing. That's significant. So, now, it does raise a couple of interesting questions, because where is Aaron at right now before he goes? He's in Egypt. What is his status? He's a slave. How is it that he can just get up and go a couple hundred miles to Midian as an act of will? Now, I know God called him and God's going to get him out. I don't mean to imply anything weird, but the question comes to my mind is this something that could have been done? Is this something that happened before? Was there communication between them? I know it doesn't make any difference, but I'm just kind of curious. I mean, he just gets up and he goes, and he appears before Moses because God told him to go. Very interesting. All right, so let's read verses 18 to 23. I think we stopped with Jen. Oh, go ahead, Jen. Do you have a question? Oh, well, we do know that he was in his house for a while. Yeah, so possibly 3 years or more. So maybe he knew. And then that raises another question. What kind of contact did he have when he was in the palace? Yeah, good. Yeah, see, you're like me. The questions start rolling in your head, and, you know. Okay, let's go ahead and start if you would, Jen. Okay, thank you. So we read now, Moses finally obeys. Okay, God has removed all of his objections. He's let him know he was upset, angry about Moses' stubbornness, and Moses decides, okay, I guess I'm in this now for sure. And so he finally obeys. In verse 18, we have a conversation with Jethro. He leaves out a couple things. What does he leave out of the conversation with Jethro? The fact that he spoke with God in a burning bush in the desert. Were you kind of short of water out there, Moses? Maybe he chose not to let him know because maybe he might have thought he was a little wacky. We don't know. But he didn't reveal this to Jethro. But it's kind of neat, though. It seems that he and Jethro had a pretty good relationship because he talks to Jethro, and now he's pretty valuable to Jethro. He's probably the number one shepherd. And so, but he says, yeah, go in peace. Go ahead and go. It's pretty cool that he has this great relationship with Jethro. In verse 19, we see kind of an unspoken fear. It's a fear that Moses must have had that he didn't bring up during the conversation. What was his unspoken fear in verse 19? Yeah, remember last time he left, Pharaoh was trying to kill him. And it wouldn't be obviously Pharaoh, it would be people working for Pharaoh. So there would be more than one or two people who are out to kill him. And God lets him know that they're dead. So there's nothing to inhibit you from going, Moses. In verse 20, we also see that Moses' wife and sons accompany him. Now, there's nothing in God's direction that says they shouldn't go. If God said, I want you to go by yourself or with Aaron, then that would be one thing. But it doesn't say there's anything wrong with him taking Zipporah and his sons, and so he does. Now, at this time, Moses does have two sons. His first son was Gershom. His second son is Eleazar, and we get that from chapter 18 a little bit later. We also see in verses 21 to 23 that God gives further instruction to Moses. Now, remember, when God appeared to Abram, he said to go, and then Abram went. And then Abram was given more information as time went on. I think that if Moses had just said, okay, and gone, this information that he requested of God would have been given to him. The signs would have been given to him. The answer to his fears would have been given to him. The people are dead as he was going. So in this case, as they're going, now he's giving further information, letting know what's going to happen. God's going to perform these miracles through Moses to Pharaoh himself. But God's going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Eventually, Pharaoh will pay for his stubbornness by the death of his firstborn son. And as we'll see, Pharaoh actually hardens his heart himself at first, and then later God continues to harden it. So we'll talk about that when we get there. It's interesting, too, that God refers to Israel as his firstborn son. The whole group of Israel is considered his firstborn son. Now, again, how did the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, view himself? As a god. And so, for Moses, the shepherd, to come before you and tell you that Israel is their firstborn son. Now, Israel is comprised primarily of what? Slaves, but shepherds, primarily, right? And so, the shepherds, how do the Egyptians feel about the shepherds? They don't even want to be around them. They are God's firstborn son. I am Pharaoh. I am a god. So you can see how there's going to be a slight difference of opinion, when Moses meets up with Pharaoh. And then also his firstborn son, Pharaoh's, will eventually die because of that. So let's read verses 24 to 26, and we left off, I think, with Greg. Okay, thanks. Now, this passage is admittedly a very challenging one. A lot of ink has been consumed as people try to write and discuss what this means. I'm going to take it at face value. It appears that either Gershom and or Eleazar had not been circumcised. Now, this is also the reason why I think Moses has been, because if he hadn't been, certainly he would have been addressed as well. So Moses was, but either Gershom or Eleazar, or both, was not. So, again, my imagination asks questions. What did this look like? Okay? I mean, did the angel of the Lord appear with a drawn sword? Did Moses become deathly ill, which a lot of people think, and just the reason for it become known? Why didn't Moses himself intervene? And the question is, perhaps he was deathly ill and unable to perform that. Either way, it's obvious that God is on the verge of taking Moses' life, and that the reason is the lack of his son's circumcision. Okay? So, does this confuse some people when you think about it? He just sent him on this mission to deliver his people, and now when he comes to a camping site, now here's the angel of the Lord about ready to kill him. And by the way, this isn't the only time this kind of thing occurs. We've talked about Balaam in the past. You know, Balaam goes with the king of Moab, or his representatives, and he has a conversation with his donkey who saved his life, you know. So this isn't the first time. What's going on here? What do you think? He did. He had to obviously know. Okay. No, thanks. No, no, I appreciate that. No, that's why, there again, it kind of puts feet to these things, you know, to imagine, figure them out. Go ahead. Yes. That's a possibility. That could have been the case. Okay. True. No, you're right. No. Hold on to that thought. Turn back to Genesis chapter 17. And Genesis chapter 17 and verse 10. And God is talking to Abraham. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. And you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin. And this shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations, a servant who is born in the house or who is bought with money from any foreigner who is not of your descendants also. Anyway, so this is a commandment, and it is the defining element of being a Jew. It's given early, so they would have known about that. Moses probably was, but apparently, one of his sons were not. So, her attitude, what was her attitude about the situation? She intervened, she performed that. What was her attitude? Good, bad, ugly? Resentful, yeah. It's pretty obvious. I mean, you don't have to read between the lines. Basically, she says to him, "You are indeed a bridegroom of blood to me." I don't take that as a sign of endearment, a phrase of endearment. So she is disgusted. She is angry about that. Now, here's my take on it. I think that she was the one who opposed it. Now, I'm not saying that Moses insisted, because if he did, it probably would have been done. So he did not insist, and or she opposed, but in either case, it didn't take place. Okay? It's a requirement for God's people, as we saw in chapter 17. And if Zipporah had not obeyed, Moses would probably have been put to death. Now, no one is indispensable. Nobody. God would have no trouble finding somebody else to do the job. He chose Moses, But what does God want out of his leaders? Obedience. He wants obedience to the nth degree of his leaders. Now, he wants the same obedience from you and I, but he wants it to the nth degree from the leaders. He wants the leaders to be able to say, not braggadociously, I want you to follow my example. For somebody to say that and not be braggadocious, but just, I'm living for the Lord, I want you to follow my example. To be able to say that to you with a good conscience and without pride. Okay? That's what we want. Now it can't be said with certainty, but it appears that Zipporah and her sons were sent back to stay with Jethro after this point, because they're not mentioned again. After this act is done, they disappear from the scene until chapter 18. In chapter 18, when Jethro meets with Moses, he brings with him Zipporah and the two sons. So what does that mean? Now, I'm surmising, so I can't say this with complete certainty, but it seems to me that Zipporah was in the wrong for not allowing this circumcision to take place, and God, in discipline, had her go back and stay with Jethro. If that's true, what did she miss out on? Everything. She missed out on the plagues. She missed out on seeing Egypt humbled. She missed out on seeing Moses lead the people out. She missed out on seeing the Red Sea parted. She missed out on seeing the Egyptians put to death. She missed out. So if what I'm surmising is correct, it was very costly to her to have missed out. She could have been that one alongside Moses to encourage him, to be his rock, to carry on with him, but she wasn't. And I think it's because of this issue and because she did not follow the leadership that she should have with Moses and in the obedience. So we talked about the overarching principle here. Leaders are held to a high standard by God. Now, leadership isn't expected to be perfect, because if it was, no one would ever be a leader, because none of us are. But we must not be involved in ongoing significant sin. Moses was involved in ongoing significant sin in not fulfilling the Abrahamic covenant with one or both of his sons. You're a leader, Moses. You're going to stand before the people, and one of your children is not identified as an Israelite. That can't happen. That can't happen. Okay? Flip over in Exodus to look over at chapter 18 for just a moment. In Exodus chapter 18, in this case, Moses' father-in-law has come back, and he's given Moses some advice on how to ease the burden that he has with leading the people. Chapter 18, verse 21, he says, "Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. Let them judge the people at all times, and let it be that every major dispute they will bring to you, but every minor dispute they themselves will judge. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you." Leadership, in this case judges, has some criteria that they should meet. They don't want to fear men. They don't want to like dishonest gain. They don't take bribes, etc. So we're looking for people who have high moral integrity to be in charge. And go into the New Testament in 1 Timothy chapter 3, we see that none of this has changed. God still has this for his people. 1 Timothy chapter 3, and I'll read from verse 1. "It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer or bishop or elder, it's a fine work he desires to do. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine nor pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how can he take care of the church of God? And not a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. My point is, God's standards haven't changed. God still has high standards for his leadership, the people that he's calling. Again, it's not perfection, but it is integrity of character. It says in verse 7, even the people on the outside don't have any legitimate thing to say against the leadership. That's the idea. And now remember, Moses, when he was denied entry into the promised land, what did he do? He hit the rock. God said, I want you to speak to the rock and water will come out. Moses went to the rock. Must we give water to you, rebels? He smacked the rock twice and water still came out. But for that one act, God says, you can't enter the promised land because you failed to treat me as holy. That one thing was enough. So God has very high standards for leadership. But I'll sidestep that and say again, it's no different than the standards all of us should have. All of us should be holy because the Lord God is holy. All of us should seek to follow God because that's what he wants, and it's beneficial to us. If you're chosen for leadership, you enter leadership, it's just like another extension of your character that you already have or should have. Okay? In fact, leadership brings out your character positively or negatively, because part of leadership is dealing with what? Problem employees, problem people, right? They're there. And it's going to be brought out, so you want to have these things. Recent situation, most of us are probably aware of the situation with Ravi Zacharias, who passed away recently. It turns out he was involved in all sorts of junk. And it's been confirmed. It's not rumor. This man who lived for decades and who had the ministry of going to different places and debating and bringing the gospel to people was involved in sexual immorality numerous times during these times. It's been confirmed. Just yesterday, I spent some time deleting all the books I had in my Kindle of him, and there were several, throwing away books that I have at home. Not because I'm angry at him being imperfect. No. The things he did, it could happen to me. It could happen to anybody. I'm a sinful man. But he's a leader. I can't quote him anymore because of what he's done. If I say, like Ravi Zacharias said, now, you, because we're a Christian organization, Christian group, we might say, okay, because it's Christian principles, yeah, that's the guy. Well, I heard about him, the outsiders, right? He doesn't have a good reputation with outsiders. He doesn't have a good reputation with insiders anymore. I can't quote him with good conscience anymore. As leaders, we've got to be careful. He undermined all of his ministry. He has hundreds of people worldwide that work in his organization. They're going to wind up being dissolved. That's going to be the end result. And then he also stood before God. Can you imagine that? And it makes me wonder sometimes, do people who become involved in this stuff forget that God is real? And that you're really, really, really going to see him? And he's really going to look at you? My goodness. What happened? At any rate, leadership is extremely important, but not just for leaders, for all of us, because we all are leaders in some realm or other. That's what God wants for us, in order to prevent us from falling and completely destroying whatever effectiveness that God has for us in our lives. Let's read verses 27 to 31, and I'm not sure where I left off. I think, Sam. Nice try. Sam read? Oh, okay, good, Sam. I thought he was... Go ahead, would you mind, Aaron? Thank you. So we now have the work beginning. Aaron arrives. He meets up with Moses. Who knows how long it's been since he's seen him? Maybe this is the first time in 40 years. Maybe it's happened a time or two before. But he greets him with affection because he's glad to see him. And then Moses tells him what's going on, and Aaron agrees to help with him. We then go right away in verse 29 to the initial meeting with the Israelites. So he assembles the elders. Now imagine being Moses and Aaron and doing this. You're going before them, you're assembling the elders of the people, and you're explaining to them what it is that God has done. He met with me in the desert. There's this burning bush. And for those that are skeptical, it says he performs the signs. It's either Aaron or Moses performed the signs because of the way the language is written there. But in either case, the signs got performed, and the people's response in verse 31, like God told them, the people believed. They believed Moses and Aaron. Yes, they are here. And the response was, they bowed down and worshiped. So they worshiped the Lord when they saw. And there again, imagine being the Israelite leaders. You're called, and all of a sudden you're told, the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, and he has sent me to deliver you from your bondage, which they have been living in Israel or Egypt for 430 years. And so it would be a time of great gratitude, humility, worship. Wow, this is really going to happen. And look at the things he can do. And that's amazing. So what might have been your expectation as a Jewish person at that time, do you think? Dave? Call a moving company, yeah, exactly. Has a camel on the side of the truck, you know. Yeah. I would have thought that. Wow, this is great. Yes, you know, let's call the moving company. Let's get our stuff together because we're leaving. Patty or Peggy. Yeah, we're not talking 40 years in the desert yet. Yeah, it's true. Of course, that wasn't part of the original plan, you know, good. So, but what they were going to find is they were going to be in for a real disappointment. As we're going to see next week, Pharaoh is less than impressed, and he's going to make it much more difficult for the Jews, and it already was difficult enough. And what's going to happen to them is they're going to lose heart because it's not happening as fast as they had hoped. You know, it just isn't. Any takeaways? Dave? Uh-huh. Yeah. It would have. Yeah, that's a good point. Or it may have been a complete failure too. You know, because they might have gone in the desert and all died of thirst or starvation. That's true. Any others? Final thoughts, takeaways? Yes, Jen. Hmm. Mm-hmm. And what's it like being free? You know, you think of being free, you just think of the freedom, but freedom isn't free. Freedom has responsibilities. Like, you know, for you and I, we're considered free, but most of us work, you know, except me because I'm retired. Hi, Lee. Anyway. Yeah, I'm free to starve. Yeah. Yeah, so freedom is a mixed bag, right? I mean, it's free, but did the Israelites think it through? Of course not, but they will. You know? Good. Let's go ahead and we'll close in prayer. Lord, thank you so much again for your word. We thank you, Lord, for all the things that we can not only read, but we can kind of sift through it. We can kind of sift it out a little bit, Lord. We can glean things that maybe just with a casual reading you might miss. And I thank you for that, Lord. I pray again, Lord, help us as leaders, all of us, because we all are leaders to one degree or another, to resolve to follow you, to resolve to be holy and turn away from sin, so that we would be worthy of following you and so that we won't undermine whatever effectiveness that you will have through the ministry you've given to us. Lord, I pray that you would be with Pastor. May he preach your word again, Lord, with power, compassion, and zeal. And Lord, with the worship team, and I pray, Lord, that as they make that joyful noise, that you may inhabit the praises of your people, that you might show us the joy of